think everyone is in here. So once Hess and James are ready, we can go ahead and get started.
Our video is disabled.
Oh, I'll open
Oh,
it up for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to do a visual check and it just was like host a disabled video. And I was like, oh my bad. Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Hey,
all
y'all.
right. Hey.
Yeah. So I think everybody is in here because somebody just said my voice sounded familiar. But yes, I am the host of Hoodoo Plant Mamas, Bree. I didn't know y'all could see us yet. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our Hoodoo Heritage Month celebration. I'm Black Joy reporter Danielle Buckingham. If you don't know who Black Joy by Reckon is, we are a bi-weekly newsletter highlighting stories of Black liberation through art, film, literature, and more. And we celebrate all things Black and joyful. You can subscribe to our newsletter with the link that I think will get dropped in the chat. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Black Joy Reckon, and on Facebook, also Black Joy Reckon. I'm super excited to introduce our speakers today, Hess Love and James Stewart. James Stewart is a proud native of Durham, North Carolina, and hoodoo practitioner of nearly 2 decades. He is the owner of Conjure Cleaning, a business that focuses on cleansing homes and aligning folks on their desired paths of life. James also recently authored the Hoodoo Handbook. James is dedicated to the work of our ancestors and is honored to create a space where others can join in the journey of reclaiming our spiritual heritage alongside him. And we'll drop a link to James's book as well in the chat. Hess Love is a mystical force embodying community archiving, ethnoecology, and poetic prowess, weaving enchantment into the fabric of existence. Engaged in the pursuit of a poetic mastery, they're also a steward of the natural world as a master naturalist, woodland steward, and bow hunting apprentice. Co-founder of the esteemed Chesapeake Conjure Society, Hess channels ancestral wisdom, unveiling the secrets of heritage, cosmovision, and sacred spaces in the Chesapeake area. A true child of the Chesapeake, they stand as a beacon of tradition and continuity. So that is James and Hess, and we will go ahead and get started. So I'm gonna reference, there's a couple of times I'm gonna reference an interview that I did with you, Hess. So we'll start with, in our recent interview, you discussed some of the incidental skills that you acquired studying hoodoo that has allowed your spiritual life and career to coexist and even enhance each other in some ways. And then for you, James, you're able to channel your spiritual gifts into your business, Conjure Cleaning. So I wanted to know if you both could talk about where you started on your particular journeys, because we know that like hoodoo is embedded in Black culture, but there's a difference between sort of being an intentional practitioner versus just kind of participating in it culturally. So I wanted to know, where did you start that kind of led to where you are now in your spiritual lives? And James, you can go first.
Okay. Also, just because we're in space together, I wanted to pour out some love to both of you. Hess, you and the Chesapeake Conjure Society. Every time I see you online, I just wanted to thank you for the ways in which y'all engage with community, because it's so loving the way that you pour information to other people. It's informative and loving, and it makes me smile. So I just have to like say that in this space. And Danny, like the work y'all do with Black Joy Recon, thank you for having us. Like much love. My journey within hoodoo was a very I was 13 years old. I was just wanting to find out more outside of the church because it just didn't feel like a good fit. And there was a lot of trauma of me looking for other religions and that being a conflict with my parents. And it's been a back and forth over the years. I've had different teachers, and sometimes it wasn't the best fit. But reading as much as I could about different magical systems, and the more books that became available about either African American spirituality or hoodoo or other systems, just in general, helped me have more of an understanding, to help me find better teachers along and piece things together in my own ancestral lineage of decoding what's what. So it's been a long journey of piecing things together and filling in a lot of blanks for myself. And it's been a hodgepodge story.
I'll answer, and I want to give y'all a heads up. I'm a mother, so there are 3 children in the background. It is a school night. It is not their bedtime yet. This is as quiet as they finna get, so you might hear them in the background here and there. First of all, James, yes, I'm so excited to share space with you and have conversation with you. And I love how you like get folks back together online. I think like we can get into this big moment of misalignment online and just being really off in the weeds. And like I love how you just bring us back to having some good old Black sense, which is so much needed in this practice. In that, so shout out to you and congrats on that book. I know that writing a book is hard work, so congrats. Oh gosh, the intentionality around hoodoo. Um, oh my gosh, that's my child in the background. My bad, y'all. And so my intentionality around hoodoo, actually, that's a good segue into this because, of course, like you said, Danielle, we kind of grow up into this tradition and you can look back and say, oh, that was hoodoo, that was hoodoo. But I want to say I became really intentional after having my 3rd child. I went through a big like sprout of postpartum depression. And so that in itself was its own grief. And then I was grieving the fact that I had no real actual help. My mother passed when I was 7. My grandmother passed when I was 21. And so like the mothering journey was very, very much lonely and very, very much like I was really isolated. And up until that point, you know, I had been grieving unintentionally, just grieving, just out here, just like a little ball of stuff. And with hoodoo, I began my hoodoo practices, I want to say 2016, when I was like, I want to grieve intentionally. How do I do that? And coming across different people, especially was a big way into that.
Well, I've seen several people. I can't cite one particular person because I've seen several people say this, that we're sort of in this like hoodoo renaissance, or a renaissance of like Black spiritual traditions. I will say one person that did a whole thread was Ia Hime, if y'all follow them on Twitter or Instagram. It also feels like we've gotten to a point where the public narrative around it is shifting in some ways, and folks are being more adamant about like reaffirming that history, um, in the midst of appropriation and like this misinformation about what hoodoo is. Can you both talk about this idea of the hoodoo renaissance as hoodoos that have been practicing it before we kind of got to this moment? What does it feel like to witness these shifts that are happening with hoodoo? And yeah.
I love it. It's all over the place, but at the same time, it's so necessary to have these very, I feel like, in-house conversations. Yes, they're on public forums, and yes, everybody can kind of see them. Not all the time. Like there are conversations that we have in private and in community, but there's so many different things that are being teased out in these conversations that haven't been worked out in generations prior. So we see the sharing of information overlap in ways that other generations of conjurers and hoodoos maybe didn't get to openly share with each other. So even when some things are a little bitter, it's still kind of amazing at the same time, because it's like this is leading us into something very good, I feel like, especially the era that we came out of, where we were literally fighting for the definition of what is hoodoo, versus all these outsiders who were like, well, hoodoo's for us too. And it's good to be in this segment of where things are.
So for me, I think the outward conversation is necessary. I agree with James too. And I've been in a lot of spaces with hoodoos that I respect who are like, y'all talk too much. Y'all say too much. You share your opinion. And all of that is absolutely necessary. And I think it's necessary in us not being I want to say closeted in the sense of what our practice is. And I really do think the idea that we cannot theorize on our own religion out and about is based on this idea that this is something that needs to be hidden. And I think there is like this idea of, if I say it out loud too much, white people are going to want to take it. But white people want to take everything. So you're going to really police yourself that much because of what white people are going to do. And with what James said, we are shaping so much. I think hoodoo's role in liberation, hoodoo's role in gender and sexuality, hoodoo's role in familial things and what we do and will and won't accept in our families and in our relationships, that's all getting teased out in real time. And even hoodoo's role in real life relationships and the sometimes weird feelings that people can have towards you because they view you a certain way. And so we start to get in the really interpersonal sense of, how do people view power and what do they want to do with it? And what do they want to do with people who they deem as having it, but they like, oh, but not more than me, or you look like that or act like this, you should not have it too. And so I think these conversations are going to be so necessary. And I've never seen record of this. I think we are really forerunning in our generation that we are talking about this out and about, in person, online, everywhere. And I think that means something for the generations in the future that are going to look back on what we say.
I want to go back to what you said at the beginning about, some people feeling like we say too much. And I wanted to know y'all's thoughts on, are there some things that are sacred? And how do we have these conversations while also, I guess, gatekeeping in a way that kind of protects the tradition, or if that's even possible from your perspective?
Oh, I didn't want to go first, but I've definitely learned a lot more in terms of, I've learned from both community and my ancestors about the need and necessity to gatekeep, and the drawbacks of when you say too much, because it affects community, but it also affects you personally in your practice and lineages as well if you say too much. And I think one of the dangers of our internet age is we always don't know who is on the receiving end of that screen. We don't always know who is looking at us, but there are sometimes a level of protection that we're afforded where our spirits, I've noticed, will make sure the word doesn't get through to who doesn't need to hear it. And that's not always the case, but this is kind of hard to explain, but I've come to understand hoodoo has some greater elements of protection that a lot of us don't fully understand. And sometimes people don't find out stuff that our ancestors or their ancestors know that they can't hold. So sometimes you aren't revealed certain information until you're proven to either community or your spirits that you can hold it. And then at that point, you get to progress in certain directions.
As you were asking the question, James, as you were talking, I was like, I want to say something. There's a lot of folks online who would not know where to start or what to do if people didn't even share a little bit of anything. And so, like, of course, people are not revealing the deep, deep mysteries, but people are opening the door and saying, try this, and then fill in the rest with your embodied experience. And I think a lot of folks feel some type of way about what's shared because all they know is what's online. And so it's like, oh, y'all talk too much. And you could be sharing 1% of what you know, but that's 100% of what they know. And they feel an absolute way. And that's just a time for them to get deep into study and start to build their own relationship with ritual building. There are not many rituals in Hoodoo, if any, that look the exact same across board. So much of this is what you build, so much of this is what you inherit from your people living and dead. And like to James's point, a lot of stuff is not going to get revealed to you until you're ready. And there's going to be things that are revealed to you that really is just for you, your students, your family, your line, the people who are going to be in the lineage of your spiritual navigation around Hoodoo. And then there are going to be some things where it's like share with the collective because there's particular spirit and ancestors. And I say spirits, I mean more than human, plant spirits, animal spirits, place spirits who want to be acknowledged and fed and worked with in a certain way. And so, yeah, I do think online information sharing has its place. And then again, you just have that discernment of what to share and when.
So there was something else you said that kind of went into this next question that I was going to ask. So, and both you and James has. So we were talking about defining hoodoo, and I remember in our conversation, Hess, you brought up some really important points about why that's important in like the religious discrimination. And a lot of people maybe don't know or don't realize that hoodoo's face and just kind of like this idea of being an out hoodoo, open every room you walk into, I'm a hoodoo. What have been some of the biggest challenges for y'all existing in our self-proclaimed Christian nation? And it is, there's so many privileges with being a Christian. How did you reach a point of being unapologetic with your spiritual practice and being open about it?
Um, I want to reference, I believe Brandon Bassnight is doing work around um, religious discrimination amongst Hoodoos, and some of his work has touched on how that is commonly found within our families, because that is where we're most seen or discovered as Hoodoos, because a lot of our work in large is ancestral and familial. So to find some of the keys to our work, we have to do some investigating, and we get met with discrimination there. And not everyone, but more so than sometimes navigating the outside world, because we're slick with it. We know how to get in and out of places and, not seem like we're doing something. But sorry, what was your original question about discrimination?
Yeah, so I wanted to know like what's been the biggest challenges for you navigating sort of whether it's family or the general public who may have sort of these misconceptions about hoodoo.
Over time, it's both language and learning how to frame things, how to talk through things. Um, when I have the capacity to hold space for family members, um, and being seen has been a hard thing, where sometimes whatever your family deems as bizarre, they don't want to see it. So if that's part of your identity, is being a hoodoo practitioner in the family, and you hold that, strong, there's a whole chunk of you that's invisible to them. And they kind of just don't want that unless spirit takes the room and is like, oh, talk about that dream, where someone's, it's like there's certain times, and I've seen it grow and change in my family, but that's definitely been the types of hurdles.
I had to think about this question because I think I've experienced some really overt forms of discrimination as a hoodoo, like from neighbors, when I have to do things outside or whatever. And, you know, if your neighbor ain't shit particularly, they always think you're doing something to them, but maybe I am. Um, but I think honestly, when I think about embodying space as a hoodoo, it can get a little awkward when I'm in like positions with like older clergy, or older community members, or either regular community members, because I'm constantly petitioning, and making room for like the history of hoodoo in our culture to be expressed, and not just something you have to suppress. You have to kind of, figure out what they're trying to say too. But I think the other part is that, I kind of safeguarded myself in so many ways as a queer person, and I'm in so many like niche communities and spaces, that it's sometimes hard for me to suss out, is a discrimination because I'm queer, or because I'm fat, or because I'm a hoodoo, or because I said my pronouns were they them, and they like, what's a they them? But just like 2 minutes ago, they said, oh, and get they you know. And so like for me, it's kind of been hard sometimes, when I'm not in a particular spiritual or historical context, to be like, well, what's the problem? But which problem do they have with me? And sometimes I feel like it might be all, and that really is their problem. And I think I'm emboldened to move in that way. I think just because my mind says like I get to exist out loud, you know. And so like some of the cases of discrimination, especially with neighbors, especially with the like the hush that goes across the room the moment I say hoodoo or conjure, or ancestors, I try to not let it roll off, but I try not to let it knock me off my square, because I think that's a form of spiritual warfare, to make someone so uncomfortable they want to, compromise and make small who they are.
I have two more questions, but for the folks in the audience, go ahead and start dropping your questions in the Q&A box. And then we'll get to the Q&A in a few minutes. So I want to talk about the Hoodoo Handbook. James wrote this comprehensive handbook that allows you to document everything from your family tree to dreams to spiritual gifts you inherited, spiritual gifts you know that other people in your family may have had. It's so much. And it gives you these tools to sort of honor your lineage, honor your and their spiritual practices, and document it. And I think that's really important when you're being intentional about hoodoo. James, can you discuss what moved you to create this handbook and what you hope it will offer folks?
Yes. So back in 2020, folks started asking me if I would teach, and I was like, I have no plans to teach. I'm not there yet in my practice. And I started toying with that idea of like, well, if I would teach, thinking about the teachers that I've had in the moments where I was like, all those aha moments were because I had a mentor or a teacher ask me a question and it prompted me to think of the answer, versus them saying, oh, go to this store, get this, this, and this, or go get this, this, and this. And then I'd like try to remember that working as long as I could. But whenever they asked me a question, that's when I felt like I moved 5 steps ahead, because I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So I started thinking about different areas of hoodoo and imagining asking someone these questions to give them space to get the answers, versus spoon feeding, because there's there's some good books, there's some not so good books out there that can give you form and structure to your practice. But I wanted something to allow folks to question for themselves and to sit in that discovery.
Hess, now I have a question for you. So you are a poet, you're a writer. Can you talk a little bit about, or if your hoodoo practice sort of influences your writing, and if so, how? Like, how do you incorporate that into your writing?
That's a good question. I first wanted to say, James, I like that you use Inquisition, because I think it's a good way for folks to learn our very proverbial nature and how to get the meat out of something. So like I love that approach. I haven't seen it. And that's kind of how I approach like my practice as a writer. That's a hoodoo, is to ask questions, and to sometimes ask questions of my characters, or ask questions of a place, or ask questions of myself, and just write what's down. I try to use my like hoodoo gives me like material, to be honest with you. And especially because like when I'm trying to start and I don't know where to start with something, I try to start with, how was this moment made, which is what a lot of hoodoo is. It's making a moment, creating a moment. How was this moment made? Where's the magic in it? Where's the mundanity? Where are the ancestors and spirits? What's the history that led to this piece? What could someone be holding spiritually in this moment that may not be apparent? And I also think the more that I write, the more that I try to get into fiction, that building characters is such a form of mediumship, because you have to connect to these people. You have to ask them questions, you have to allow them to talk to you, but you have to be good at asking questions, and you have to be okay with seeming out of your mind sometimes. And so I think hoodoo and writing converge in a beautiful way. It gives me like good reason why I talk to myself. People are like, oh, they probably just write it in their head. Absolutely not at that moment, but if you think that, we're gonna go ahead with it. Absolutely. Like it gives me such a good space. And I love that writing as an act, as a practice, is that sense of tapping into yourself and tapping into whatever entity is naming itself as something else, but wants to talk to you in that moment and share a particular story from the past, present, or future, or some other realm we place.
Thank y'all. So we have some really great questions in this chat. So I'm glad I decided to stop a little bit early, because I saw that they were coming in. The first one that I wanted to actually start with, because I thought this was a really great question and I feel like it comes up a lot, is how do you see hoodoo as a way or a path towards liberation? How do we use hoodoo as a path towards liberation?
I had like too many ideas float in, and I was like, give me a second to get the words together. Because I've been thinking about this in the past 2 weeks, and speaking about liberation as we're watching what's going on in Palestine. It's like processing that from a hoodoo lens. Yes, we should be doing as much as we can supportive wise, but thinking about the interconnectivity of the fires that are happening here, and hoodoo gives way for liberation work, and thinking about prophecy, and when it's time to do certain works, like Nat Turner's Rebellion was based off of prophecy, off of that eclipse. Thinking about give me a second, because there's a couple of references that I want to come back to. Sorry.
Did you have any thoughts, Hess?
I think hoodoo is a tool for liberation in the sense that it's asking you to be very connected to other human beings and the world around you. And I think that connection leads to such a sense of awareness. You have to be aware of what's going on. You have to be aware of how the physical material world around you is changing. You have to be aware of its impact on plants and animals, on people. I think like just that sense of being aware in a colonial space that does not want us to be aware, just to work, just to exist, to feed the machine too. I think that's important. And so like going back to our interview, like the sensorial nature of hoodoo, it's like using all your senses, being very present to know what's going on, and then to make an act to commit to an action to remedy it or to help towards fixing it or to start pushing against it as well.
Sorry, also thinking about the ways in which hoodoo drives us back into community, because there's so many keys that are in other people and other things around us and our environment, that hoodoo can't be done in an isolated sense. So off of that movement, forcing you to build community with the people, the spirits, the things around you, that drives us towards liberation.
Did you want to add something, Hess?
I was just shaking my head to the
Oh.
community part because that's the reason why community. That's literally the reason why it's a liberatory tool.
Well, that kind of goes into this next question someone asked. They were very specific. I think they might be from Baltimore. So they asked, how do you find a mentor in the hoodoo community in Baltimore? But in general, because I think a lot of people are always like, how do I find a mentor? How do I find an elder? And so, yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? How do you find that mentor as a hoodoo?
People have different approaches. There are some hoodoos that I know that their approach was literally to find like a ritualistic, ceremonial, literal, like, I'm going to teach you how to conjure hoodoo. For me, mine was like a wraparound. It was me going, like thinking about what work am I meant to do? What's my purpose? What's the medicine that I'm meant to give? What particular industries those are? And then going into those industries and putting myself out there, meeting people and feeling folks out. I had to have a lot of conversations with people, talking with them. And it wasn't like are you a hoodoo? Will you be my mentor kind of thing? It's kind of feeling out, what do they feel about ancestors? What did they do for certain things? Like literally listening so hard. And that's not a romantic approach. It takes a long time but I think once you get that skill, you've already spent the time to get to know the person, and to build that intimacy and build that knowing. And so I say that, like, there are some people who are going to be birth workers. Get with elder birth workers, listen to what they're saying. You can kind of feel who's a hoodoo or not, who can teach you a little something, right? If you're a historian, same thing. If you are a doctor, nurse, same thing. If you are a farmer, same thing. Literally get to know people in your field.
100%. The only thing I would possibly add, and you kind of touched on this, is if I could go back and tell myself something different, I would maybe suggest a couple of just books to give you a praxis on things, because there was a couple of teachers that I maybe would have been like, oh, if I'd have known more research about certain areas, I might have weeded someone out a little quicker. But also that was character judgment as well. And that goes into studying people, but big on the listening hard and big on building community and sussing people out before like nosediving into, oh, let me try to like scoop you as a teacher.
Someone else asked a really good question that goes back into the community aspect. And someone asked, what advice do you have for folks who are navigating the practice alone because the people, their family, the people in their community aren't really where they are as far as them embodying these practices. So where should they start? What advice do y'all have for those people?
If you're able to build digital community, don't knock that in terms of like the connections that you create, because I've been able to build incredible connections with people off of digital community, and I'm thankful for the time that we're in because of that. But don't knock that in terms of being able to connect with people just across wherever, like whether locally or, you know, 2 states away on the other side of the country, so on and so forth.
I'm seconding that. Like, don't knock it. Use your discernment in the same exact, especially online. There's like this thing, it's like a thing where people kind of bypass the inhibitions and they kind of show a different side of themselves online. So especially use your discernment when online, but do not knock it. You know, we do have divinities and folks who look over technology, and we are at a really wonderful place that we can connect with folks all over the world with one post, one image, one video, and that means something. When I think about the Chesapeake Conjure Society, majority of the people that are in it, I met them online. I put the word out there, and I was like, "We're gonna meet here at this park and do this thing," and folks showed up. And that, like, be willing to take things offline, to be willing to open to meet people in person. There is a lot of vulnerability there as well. And I also want to say, in those moments where people might say this is controversial, I don't think that there's a such thing as a solitary practitioner in hoodoo, because we're always accompanied, even when but not with another living human being. So literally go outside and start to like sit still. Like go outside, walk somewhere and sit still for like 15 minutes and watch how the things that are hiding from humans start to come out and go about their natural life. And you know, when you're literally alone and you're in that space, when you're kind of in limbo and trying to build that physical community, build it with non-humans, build it with plants, build it with animals. Go sit, keep going to the same place every season, once a week or whatever, and watch how it changes. Like find ways to be really expansive in building that community.
I love that you mentioned non-human because I feel like this tree, it's died now, but this bonsai tree that I got, that was my first plant. Having that plant really shifted my entire spiritual life. So I love that you mentioned that because that's really important. Um, Another question is, and I like this question too because it's real. How do you stay connected to your practice when life is hard, life is draining, everything is bad? Like, how do you stay grounded in it in the midst of that?
Try your best to stay present and honest in the moment. If you don't feel like doing something, voice that out in the air and see what you're met with. Because there are times where I'm like, this is all I got. And I say that in prayer form, and then I'm met with assistance. Being real and honest in my practice has helped me consistently with the best of times and the worst of times, because spirits check your heart. And if you just try your best to be honest in the moment with things, you will be met with so much grace and so much love, honestly.
We're thinking the same thing. When my grandmother was teaching me how to pray, and she was really interesting because she grew up in the church, but as soon as she got out the house, she didn't go to church. So I did not go to church. My dad didn't go to church. Like, of course, we went to church sometimes because the church is a part of the Black community. And so like you can't really avoid it if you want to be around people, but we didn't have like a church practice. And I remember when she was saying, you know, sometimes pray. She's like, pray, even when all you can do is roll to the other side of the bed and say, "Our Father," just pray. And I have a friend, Toya Smith, who's also part of Chesapeake Conjure Society. And she was like, look, sometimes all I can say is y'all help. And that's it. When life is lifing, I think understand that hoodoo is about being like just you, being embodied. You are literally living and breathing right now. You exist. There's nothing that you need to feel guilty about. You do not need to feel guilty that you did not take that spiritual bath. Should you have? Absolutely, you should have taken it, right? And we know this, but do not feel guilty about it because you ain't take it for a reason. Whether it's your own capacity, do not feel guilty like I should have did this thing with the candles and all this and got some blood, whatever. Like, should you have? Yeah, maybe you should have, but do not feel guilty that you didn't. And so I say that it's like whatever guilt you're feeling about not doing something, like check where that's actually coming from. Is that from the tradition or is that from the various messages that we're getting as we are navigating this world too? It's I love that hoodoo was like that in between space between knowing better and doing better. That's the thing that kind of pushes you a little better. Like you'll know it, you just can't do it for whatever reason. But don't beat yourself up about it. You're not less than. And also like check your capacity. Don't overwork yourself. I think so many of our ancestors and spirits, especially like John Henry, are like, do not overwork yourself, please. And so like, don't feel like you have to overly commit your physical labor because most of the time people feel guilt. That's what it's about, their ability to perform physical labor. Don't overcommit that.
Another really good question from Serene. How do we get better with discerning which ancestors are coming forth, especially for the LGBT children? I'm often told in divinations that I need to be talking to the right people, but no one gives instructions on how we can call them in. And then how can we confirm spirit? And then how we can confirm spirit.
Just a clarifying question. Are they asking how to call in like queer spirits?
Well, how do you get better at discerning? I think this question is kind of about how do you get better at discerning which ancestors are coming forth, especially as an LGBT person. Like, I think it's in conversation with this idea of like, our ancestors homophobic, and then how do I navigate that, especially if I know the ancestor was, homophobic. Like, how do you use that discernment with that?
This is an interesting question, and I feel like you could slice it in two ways. So I'm gonna talk about my grandma. I remember when she passed, I was having dreams leading up to her passing because I was in California at the time. And I had one dream in particular where she gave me, this was while she was still alive, she gave me a journal, and she, in the dream, told me that she had been writing journals for each of her grandkids. And in the dream, I remember she told me that she knew I was queer. And I cried in the dream. And I cried when I woke up because I was like, this is something that we don't talk about in that side of the family. And after I still regret that I didn't come out to her. But after she passed and after the time had settled where I felt like I could connect to her as an ancestor, there was an ease in my stomach, especially where I could feel that it was okay to talk to her about being queer and talk to her about my dating life. And then I've been able to see her sort of weave her energy through certain movements in my dating life. Is that everybody? No. Is that every spirit? No. But sometimes your body will tell you, especially that apprehension that you feel either a pit in your stomach or somewhere of, I'm not okay, or I'm not safe with this subject, with this person. As far as discerning who you're talking to, there's various processes or things that you can do to get very clear on that spirit. sometimes it's as simple as asking and saying, am I talking to so-and-so, or asking for signs from that spirit to confirm, or getting clear on dream interpretation with them. But I don't know if that fully answers the question.
That is an interesting question. And I think it is an important question to ask queer folks. I really do think about something that Juju Bay said online. And I want to say it was super recently. She said it somewhere. It might have been Instagram, might have been Twitter. I don't know where she said it. She said it though. I want to give her credit. Where she said she had this one ancestor come to her, and she really sat there, and the ancestor's like, I don't understand, like, why, do you want to move like this? And she explained it to her, and she just explained it to her. And I think if you have an ancestor that seems more curious than discriminatory, explain it and see how you feel afterwards too. I kind of joked, I kind of joke as somebody who has been queer, but not always out. Well, I was in and out a lot, but like one of the times that I was in, right? And I was dealing with a lot of older lesbian folk, and like I always tease, I'm like, that you've been gay for a long time when that old lesbians say, "Are you in the life?" And so like, "Oh, you in the life?" And it's like, I don't say that. That's really some geriatric Gen X and above stuff. Okay. And so I kind of sometimes joke, I'm like, to my ancestors who are okay with me being in the life, because even the non-queer older folks know what in the world that means. And I get folks who are okay with it. And then for ancestors who, I don't want to say they're not okay, they just haven't reached a point of understanding. They don't get to be a part of that work. And so it's so interesting, because I had a reading with Mama Rue, and she was like, "Oh, you're a Claire to do love work." And I was like, "Are you sure, for real?" Because at first when I was doing love work, and I wasn't asking for a specific person, just like, a good time, like a good time, right? It wasn't like fall in love, it was a good time. They were sending men. And I was like, okay. And then I was like, come on, y'all. And then they started sending a lot of studs. I'm like, I don't hate studs. They're not my number one top pick. Could y'all please, like, could you help me? And they were like, I'm trying to help. And so we kind of had these conversations. I'm like, let me tell you what I like and the kind of people that I'm around. I like people who are femme, regardless of like how they reach that, that thing. I like those kind of people. And so having those conversations and rituals, like, and do not play with me this time. And we were having the lunch yesterday, which has to be Conjure Society, and multiple people who are also queer have had to say that. It's like, and when I say this is what I mean. This is what I'm open to. Do not just send only one kind of person, because that makes the most sense in your mind. Make it make sense to me. Too. It's like, stand up for yourself. That's the answer. It's stand up for yourself and be open to hearing the ancestors that love you and understand too.
I think we have time for 2 more questions based on the time, but I'm going to answer one question. How can we contact both of the panelists for speaking engagements? Both panelists have websites. You can Google them. Did y'all want to add anything else to that, to preface what I said about the websites, or is that good?
If you email is always best. I don't always see DMs sometimes, so if you send me an email, I'll probably see it for sure.
Same. I be avoiding DMs because you got like the little sex bot spammers, and then you got the my child, the ancestors have a message for you. Ones, and then you get some random stuff, and so it's just like, please email me. That is the best way. Even if the email was like, "Hey, how you doing?" Whatever. Like, it doesn't have to be super formal email. Like, it would just be respectful, but email is the best way.
Roman has a really interesting question. What advice would you give in avoiding ego and building community with other hoodoos?
You can't avoid it. I'm gonna be honest with you can't avoid that. Just like given the nature of we're in a spiritual practice and we're in a practice that talks about power, we are going to face various forms of ego, whether someone's an egomaniac or they build their ego by deflating their self. And so I think like the best way to avoid getting wrapped up in someone who is all ego is to listen and move slowly around them, move as slowly as you can. And check how you feel too. Sometimes your gut tells you something, and sometimes your gut feeling might not even always be about that person, it's about you. Like you may not like that person. That person could be a-okay. But check how your gut is feeling. And if your gut does not feel okay, you don't have to convict the other person, but just take a little bit of a step back. Like there is no avoiding because we're going to see it and we see it all the daggone time, but there is just moving in a way where it's like, I want to make sure I don't get wrapped up because typically the people, when I'm thinking like the ego that you mean, like they have this big magnetic vacuum pack. It's very much the sun. And if you get too close, you're going to get in that joint. And I think like making sure you don't get too close when you're unsure is really, really important.
Also, adding to that point, don't there's a level of fear that comes in for some people when they're like moving around people who they might look up to or want to learn from, and don't give away your agency in those moments. Metaphorically speaking, always keep a little mirror on yourself, like a little like ask honest questions and don't be afraid to like ask questions. Like if somebody says something crazy, be like, did you mean to say that? Like, don't be afraid, not like a full on check, but don't be afraid to like hold up a little mirror to people every now and then, to help keep them honest. And if that creates something, then that might be your sign to be like, okay, maybe I should shift and look elsewhere for community. But I think a lot of people sit in spiritual spaces sit in spiritual spaces out of fear because they are checking around to see everybody else's moves. And if it doesn't feel right for you, just leave.
A lot of people asked about books. So y'all can I'm gonna link to Black Joy's a bookshop list where we have some resources that people we've interviewed and other hoodoos have recommended. But do you all have, and if you can give like fiction, either a fiction or poetry book and then a nonfiction book, like two books that you feel like are really good resources for people that want to learn more about hoodoo?
Can you give me like 10 seconds to run to another room real quick? Be right back.
I'm gonna fill in while you running. Poetry, Lucille Clifton, Blessing the Boats, her whole collection. Um, Man, that woman is a wonder for real. Like for real. Like check out her poetry. She is recorded in terms of talking about spirit writing, automatic writing, using different tools to get in contact with like various entities, spirits in the house. And if you her house that she lived in is now like an art center. Her oldest daughter Sydney created an art center. If you ever are blessed to go, if you ever have programming that's public, go. And if you ever go, feel it, and you'll know what I mean. In terms of fiction, I really like. I'm trying to think of something I have never heard anyone else ever say. And I want to say I think J. California Cooper is a good person for fiction too. And then there's this one book. It's like Jim and Louisa's remedy for Heartbreak Remedy or something like that. I forgot the whole name of the title and I forgot who wrote it. It might have been J. California Cooper. It might have been Bertice Berry, who's also another fiction writer I would definitely recommend too. She wrote this book called The Haunting of Hip Hop. But those are fiction books. And then for nonfiction, of course, I'm going to shout out Author Flowers and the Hoodoo Book of Flowers, anything that he is writing. Because I can't say that's fiction. Like if you meet him, that's for real. That's for real, for real. So
I had to write some of those down. Thank you. I know a lot of people reference Mojo Working, so I grabbed that one by Katrina Hazard Donald. Also, Slave Religion by Albert J. Riboteau. Also, I've been working through some of Virginia Hamilton's books, like the kids' books, The People Could Fly, and coming back to them with a hoodoo lens. And it's like you being grown and rereading some of these books is hitting on a lot of different levels, and seeing them with the different lens is so beneficial. So I highly recommend, like I got all three, not all three, because she has a lot of books, but The People Could Fly and Folk Tales, and there's another one that's a companion to The People Could Fly. So highly recommend those.
For some reason, as soon as I wanted to recommend it, he's known as Son of Baldwin on the internet, but he wrote a book that I would also recommend set in Mississippi. I'm gonna add it to the list at our bookshop because I can't remember it right now. But thank you all, everyone that came. I think we got up to like 110, 115. So that was really great. I'm so thankful for Hess and James and for y'all bringing your expertise and your gifts to this space. Did you all have any final thoughts that you wanted to leave us with before we all log off?
Just pouring out more gratitude. Danny, thank you. Hess, thank you. And thank you to everybody who stopped through. And I'm just really glad to be a part of this, and especially in this Hoodoo month, this Hoodoo Heritage Month. It's a very interesting one, but I'm glad to be here. So thank y'all.
same thing. Thanks for giving us your time and your goodness and coming in with good faith. And then also a word I want to leave with. Ooh, this is a good one. Don't be afraid when you meet information that is different than what you know right now. They call that cognitive dissonance, when it's like, that's not what I know. And so much medicine that's waiting for you is waiting for you to get over what you've held on to as what you knew. And sometimes even like accepting another piece of information is not even a complete unraveling of what you knew, it's just adding more to the story. And I don't know what made me say that, but like, yeah, it's don't block ways that you can grow yourself. Especially when you meet new information that might be against everything you know, but when you think about it, it is the most kind, it is the most just, it is the most liberatory. Be open to that.
All right. Well, thank y'all so much. And don't forget to sign up for Black Joy's newsletter. And I hope y'all have a good night. All right.
Good night.